Cleveland up the Ohio, the state, not the Ohio River. How did the Browns do? They've had a pretty interesting offseason.
Yeah, I think they had a great offseason as well. Obviously capped off with a recent move with the trade for Zadarius Smith. Smith had more pressures than every edge rusher not named Myles Garrett combined on the Cleveland Browns last year. You also bring in Ogba Okoronkwo from Houston, which I love now because, on passing downs, on third downs, you probably kick Smith inside and have Okoronkwo, Garrett on the edge, and then Smith and Dalvin Tomlinson on the interior. I mean, that is a gigantic upgrade from what they had last year. And Jim Schwartz is now calling the shots on defense, which I think is going underrated. Everyone should be kind of, lauding Miami for getting Vic Fangio. Schwartz is a really, really good defensive play caller as well. We saw at Tennessee, they rotated 9 dudes on the defensive line, half of whom you probably never heard of, and all of them were very, very productive, very good players. So I think they did phenomenally. My favorite move, if we dive into that, is the trade for Elijah Moore. So for a couple of reasons. I think you needed more weapons besides Amari Cooper. I think Moore is such a different skill set. He is a quick separator. You're going to put him in the slot. He can win down the field. He has speed, but I think just gives you kind of a different skill set. And then, of course, Donovan Peoples-Jones will kind of be the big body, go up and get a guy on the outside. But also, in that trade, instead of just giving a pick to go get Elijah Moore, they do a pick swap, and they actually use that third-round pick on Cedric Tillman. So you added 2 wide receivers for moving down around in the draft. And I think that was just a smart way to really overhaul your receiving core. Look, it's a tough division, like I said, but this roster on paper is pretty loaded if, of course, big if, Deshaun Watson can get back to a former version that we did not see last year.
So there were a lot of people in the chat and the replies previously when we talked about it complaining about my characterization of how the trade for Zadarius Smith actually ends up netting out. So you, as somebody who's who's done work on not improving the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, but having a better trade chart, a better, more accurate, more modern day interpretation, how would you sum up the algebra of when you start canceling out all those picks? What is the net of what Cleveland gave up for that contract?
Yeah, so it's again, I like pick swaps a lot because if you're going to move, I mean, look, 2/5 for what was like a 6th and a 7th.
Yeah.
Realistically, none of those picks could be anything. I think on our chart, it comes out to the Vikings gained an equivalent of like a mid-5th round pick. The bigger thing was they were not going to pay him, or they didn't want to pay him. He was clearly disgruntled, was owed about $12.5 million, I want to say, for this year, and about $20 million the year after that. Instead, he comes to Cleveland. The last year of the deal is chopped off, so he's in a contract year, and it sounds like they reworked the deal a little bit to give him more guarantees and a slightly lower base value. So, yeah, Minnesota picks up some picks, but it's more about clearing money. They obviously go out and sign Marcus Davenport for a reason. I think it's kind of just like a win-win. Like, every party in this arrangement won.
All right, so mid-5th round pick is the net of that trade. I think I'd say it saw somewhere that it was a 7th round pick was the equivalent, but it's higher than I thought it was. There you go.
There you go.
So, yeah, I think the Browns offseason generally, they've added a lot of talent. They've added talent at the right areas. That defensive line was a mess last season. We talked about Zadarius Smith, Okoronkwo as well, Dalvin Tomlinson. In the draft, they hit it as well. That defensive line should be dramatically better than it was last year. And, there's not a whole lot of targeting the secondary, but you look at the secondary last year, and on paper, it should have been really good. It just wasn't, in part because the defensive line was getting gashed and they weren't able to make plays to help the secondary. So I think they're kind of banking on the idea that if all these defensive line additions, the front 7 guys work out, then the guys we have on the back end should play much better than they did a year ago.
I think it's a huge piece of it. And a very underrated small move they made was bringing in Rodney McLeod, who was with Indianapolis last year, was obviously with Philly for, 6-7 years. I think all of those with Jim Schwartz. So not only the defensive line, which is a huge, huge part of it, but I also think the talent is obvious in this back 7 in the secondary, but every guy was like 25 years old or younger. And now I think you have, kind of that cagey veteran to help, a Greg Newsome, help a Denzel Ward, help a Grant Delpit. Yeah, like I said, on paper, I'm in love with this team. They just got to show up and actually do it.
I really like their draft as well. I think there's always a danger when you when a team drafts a couple of guys that slid for some reason, right? And by this, I mean the Ohio State guys, DeJuan Jones at tackle, Luke Whippler at center. They end up being drafted in the 4th round, the 6th round, respectively, when we were talking about a potential fringe first-round guy in DeJuan Jones and maybe a second-round guy in Luke Whippler. So when that happens, you're automatically, I think, disposed to being like, oh, that's great value. It's a steal. But there's usually reasons that these guys fall, right? So for DeJuan Jones, Chris was talking a lot about the attitude that he had in the offseason and his pro day and how he turned a lot of teams off with that, or whether it's medicals or whatever it is. The point being, they might not actually end up being the kind of steals you think they are. There's a reason they slid that far. But even if you kind of ring fence those two guys and put them to the side, Cedric Tillman in the 3rd round feels like phenomenal value for him. Siaki Ika on the defensive line, again, to continue that assault up front in the 3rd round is great value. Isaiah McGuire, the sort of big-bodied, can set a hard edge type of edge defender from Missouri in the 4th round. Even DTR, who I don't think, I don't love as a prospect, but in the 5th round is phenomenal value. So I love their draft overall, even if you forget the guys that look like the best value from it.
No, I agree. If you account for where they were taken, they had no 1st or 2nd round pick. I think it's great value. And then, too, like we just talked about with the Bengals, DeJuan Jones, backup swing tackle. Luke Whippler, backup center. They re-signed their starting center, Ethan Pocic. Like every single guy, maybe besides Siaki Ika, is like the 4th guy in the depth chart of their position. I like Isaiah McGuire, too. He's now their 4th edge. Probably will play on early downs, like you said, a good edge setter, not a great pass rusher. Yeah, I think they did about as well as they could with their first pick coming at 74, in my opinion.
No, I agree. So I think overall this is, again, one of the better off seasons in the NFL. We gave it an A, right up there with Cincinnati's, an A- for their draft, and an A- for their overall free agent strategy, which included those trades. So great off season for Cleveland. And, a team I think that now needs Deshaun Watson to get back where he was when he was earning 90-plus PFF grades at Houston. If he does that, the Browns are back to being contenders. If he doesn't, they could be anywhere, right? Like we saw last season that there's not really a floor to how bad this thing can be if Deshaun Watson doesn't get himself back on track.
The widest range in the NFL, but if he does get back to those 90s, I think they're going to be a force.